The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel, from the beginning of the Holy Gospel, according to Matthew. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham became the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah became the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Perez became the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab became the father of Nahshon, Nahshon became the father of Salmon, and Salmon the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz became the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed became the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David, the king. David became the father of Solomon, whose mother had been the wife of Uriah. Solomon became the father of Rehoboam, Rehoboam the father of Abijah, Abijah the father of Asaph, Asaph became the father of Jehoshaphat, and Jehoshaphat the father of Joram, Joram the father of Uzziah. Uzziah became the father of Jotham, Jotham the father of Ahaz, Ahaz the father of Hezekiah. Hezekiah became the father of Manasseh, and Manasseh the father of Amos, Amos the father of Josiah. Josiah became the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the Babylonian exile. After the Babylonian exile, Jeconiah became the father of Shealtiel, Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel, Zerubbabel the father of Abiud, Abiud became the father of Eliakim, Eliakim the father of Azar, Azar the father of Zadok. Zadok became the father of Achim, Achim the father of Eliud, Eliud the father of Eleazar, and Eleazar became the father of Mathan, Mathan the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary. Of her was born Jesus, who is called the Christ. Thus, the total number of generations from Abraham to David is 14 generations. From David to the Babylonian exile, 14 generations. From the Babylonian exile to the Christ, 14 generations. Now, this is how the birth of Jesus Christ came about. When his mother Mary was betrothed to Joseph, but before they lived together, she was found with child through the Holy Spirit. Joseph, her husband, since he was a righteous man, yet unwilling to expose her to shame, decided to divorce her quietly. Such was his intention, when, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary, your wife, into your home. For it is through the Holy Spirit that this child has been conceived in her. She will bear a son, and you are to name him Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall name him Emmanuel, which means God with us. When Joseph awoke, he did as the angel of the Lord had commanded him and took his wife into his home. He had no relations with her until she bore a son, and he named him Jesus. The Gospel of the Lord. Why is this genealogy of Jesus, which seems to many of us so strange and even so boring, why is it important? Why is it so important that Matthew devotes almost the whole chapter of the beginning of his gospel to this genealogy, naming all of these people? Now, it's not a strict genealogy in the sense that you might compile for yourself on Ancestry.com, but rather it tells of the basic line from which Jesus emerged. Matthew is very clear at the beginning. Jesus is the son of David, the son of Abraham. That establishes his pedigree. First of all, as a member of the chosen people, the Jewish people, the people whom God held dear, close to his heart. And he was a descendant of David, the greatest of the kings, the one that throughout the subsequent history, all of the Jews who took their relationship with God seriously looked back upon as the model for the one who would restore Israel, who would make them once again God's people. Now you'll notice one thing, if you begin to look at the names here and try to find them in the Old Testament, you can find about half of them, maybe a little more than half. The others are just kind of lost to history or legend or whatever. But you'll find only half of them. But those half are very interesting. You know what they all have in common? They are all sinners. Some of them pretty bad sinners. And in that list of sinners who were ancestors of Jesus, there were 4 women that Matthew goes out of his name to name. And, interestingly enough, they were sinners too. In fact, their sinfulness depended upon a man. And they also, all of them were either foreigners. 3 of them were foreigners. They were not Jews. They were not children of Abraham. One of them, Bathsheba, the wife of the mistress, you might say, of David, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite, was married to a foreigner. She may have been a foreigner herself. So they all came from outside. In some sense, all of them were outside of what we would call the sphere of God's love. They were sinners. Not that God didn't love them, but that they, in one way or another, walked out on God's love. So what do we have in the ancestry of Jesus? Is a bunch of people, guess what? Not very much different from ourselves. In fact, it's true, I think, if you look at them, that some of them probably would not have considered themselves sinners because they thought they were righteous because God favored them. And God did favor them. But most of them had a very hard time obeying God. Does that sound familiar? So, the people that Jesus came from, in some ways, were not that much different from us. Now, there's another very interesting thing about this genealogy. If you listen carefully, Matthew divided it into 3 parts. Before David. From Abraham to David was the first part. That was when God was struggling with his people to try to form them. And finally, he formed them from nomadic families, tribes, roaming in the desert. He formed them to be a kingdom. David was the king. The second part, however, right after King David, things started falling apart. The kingdom became divided and was conquered. And then we had the Babylonian exile, where the people were hauled off to a foreign land as captives. They couldn't get much lower than that. But they were freed. And that's the third part. And during that period of freedom, they never could regroup as a nation that had any power or integrity. They remained divided, scattered, fragmented, oppressed by others. During all of that time, they were looking back and saying, you know, God, and you find this a lot in the scriptures. You know, God, you promised that there would be somebody like David. Years and years and years have gone by, and there's nobody like David. Nobody has come along to free us from our oppression. Nobody has come along to unify us, to bring us back to what you want us to be. You can just, in some of the Psalms and the prophets and the wisdom writings also, you can just hear that frustration in their voice. What's wrong with you, God? You are not fulfilling your promise. That's why Matthew went into all of that genealogy stuff. Because he wanted to show that here, at last, was the fulfillment of that promise. And so on this Vigil Mass of Easter, we look backward. Just as in the daytime Mass tomorrow, we look forward. But right now, we are prepared to rejoice in the coming of the one who for ages and ages and ages and ages had been promised. Now, he is here.